and welcome once again to the Cine-Files, where each week we enter the world of a great film, we explore its themes, the history, the filmmaking, and the influence it has on us today. My name is Steve Morris. I'm a filmmaker and directing instructor in Los Angeles, California.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Roca. I'm a voiceover artist, host of shows here in LA, and occasionally an actor as well.
And today we get to do it again. We get to introduce a new great director.
Yes.
One of the great directors, one of the most lauded directors of all time.
Finally.
Yeah, Akira Kurosawa.
Hooah.
We have had so many requests to do Kurosawa films.
Yeah.
And you were just saying before we got on the mic, and I agree. I think we picked the right one to start with.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people, obviously Seven Samurai is considered his epic, his classic, but I think if we're going to walk into Kurosawa, this is a great one to walk into with, and it's short enough that people get a dose, and then when we hit Samurai, which we will at some point down the road,
absolutely,
it's going to be a 3-hour podcast probably.
Well, and I think this has been yours and my instinct from the beginning. It's like when we did our first Tarantino, we did Reservoir Dogs.
You're right.
We didn't jump into Pulp Fiction. When we did Orson Welles, we didn't do Citizen Kane.
Not yet.
We did Touch of Evil. It's that there's this instinct of we want to walk into the filmmaker and kind of introduce them, and then when we get up to it.
Yeah, when we get strong enough.
Because Seven Samurai is going to be a big one.
That's an opus.
Yeah, and it's coming. There's no question we're going to do that film.
And so Citizen Kane.
But today we're going to talk about Yojimbo. And normally when we do this show, the first thing I ask you is how you first came to the film. But I want to ask you something else first, which is how did you first come to the world of the samurai in Japan? Oh. And maybe to Kurosawa before we get to how you first came to Yojimbo.
That's a great question, Steve. Some things that I think we're born with this interest or attraction to certain cultures, right? And for me, the British culture and the Japanese culture have been the top two cultures that have just gravitated. There's a nobility, there's an honor, and yes, there's a very complicated history with their colonialism and the politics, certainly, but there's a nobility in both those empires that you can find in the stories. And to me, the Japanese empire, much so with samurai, there's a nobility in soldiers, there's a nobility in service, there's a nobility to your lord, and there's also interest within this idea of a wandering samurai, Ronin. So there's so much involved in samurai that isn't just serving. I even bought the Book of Samurai by, I think, Honsuke, something like that, which has all the tenets of how you would be a samurai if you wanted to. And I've always been fascinated by the sword. That's why I love Kill Bill so much, both 1 and 2, because of the Hatari Hanzo sword. Those things have always just spoke to me because there's something, I've just always was born with this instinct to gravitate to characters of nobility, and I've always seen the samurai this way.
Absolutely. Well, and I think there's a real connection between England and Japan, and particularly in this sense, which is that, we talked about Excalibur and we talked about King Arthur.
Right.
And the knight.
It's another thing, yeah.
And the code of chivalry there's a direct parallel between the code of chivalry and the knight and the samurai and the code of Bushido.
Yeah.
There's a real connection there, and there's something, I think, for guys like you and I, and for a lot of other people, that's just the sort of black and white honor. Everything is towards this duty. The word is giri, would be the Japanese word, and that's something really attractive. And you kind of think, maybe for me, like measuring myself as a young man is like, oh, would I be a samurai? And would I be able to do that?
Yeah.
And so here's my story.
Okay.
So it's a little bit meandering, but my love of this started where I was a Boy Scout.
Okay.
And I'm backpacking with my troop in a place called Philmont in New Mexico. And a friend of mine, Mark Mathis, is reading this really thick book, and it has a white cover and red lettering. And I go, oh, what is that? And he goes, oh, and I read like the first page, and there's like a race car thing in it. And I go, okay.
Right.
And I just remembered that cover because it was so iconic. And then 3 years later, I'm in Israel traveling with my confirmation class, and I had read through all the Piers Anthony and Isaac Asimov stuff I had brought with me, and I needed a new book, and I'm in Jerusalem in a bookstore, and there I see this big, thick book with this white cover with this red lettering, and that book is James Clavell's Noble House.
Wow.
And that's where I bought it, and I blasted through it when I was in Israel, and then I read everything else by him, and that led me to Shogun.
Oh, right.
And when I was in high school, James Clavell instantly became my favorite writer of all time. Wow. Now, is he still my favorite writer? No. I still have a real love for those books.
Yeah.
But Shogun led me to Japan. And,
interesting.
Yeah, and I read those books over and over and over again. And that led me to Akira Kurosawa.
Right.
And that led me to samurai films. It led me to Musashi Miyamoto and Book of Five Rings.
Yes.
And that led me to Lone Wolf and Cub, the great Japanese comic book, one of the great things of all time.
Right.
And so over and over, I'm going back to this world of the samurai. And of course, later on was when I really started doing martial arts, and now, of course, did Aikido for so long. And so there's all these connections between me and Japan.
Right.
And a lot of it just comes back to that first love of the idea of the samurai.
Well, David, I didn't get to flesh out my story like that.
Well, I thought about it on the way here.
So give me some seconds here. Then I would say yes. I instinctually was drawn to it, but when I started exploring film when I was at Charlottesville, Virginia. In Charlottesville, Virginia, I started to discover film. Right, my friend who had gone to film school, Wade Nizolek, he just moved out here. He put me in essence in his film class, and so I would go to the University of Virginia and I would watch a Laserdisc for hours on end.
Right,
just sit there because you could rent them out and actually sit there and watch them all day.
Yeah.
And Seven Samurai was the first thing, and from there I started to go into all kinds of stuff, because then I bought Ronin, the Frank Miller Ronin, which I think is still
it's amazing.
Yeah, and Lone Wolf and Cub I collected by issue as well, but also the Samurai trilogy, anything, and Mifune became anything Mifune did. I watched Hell in the Pacific.
That's a fascinating movie. By the way, I haven't seen it in a long time.
Yeah,
and my memory is it's amazing, and then it just ends, and you're like, "What the fuck happened?"
Yeah, exactly. And so to me, I've always gravitated to. So a number of my Criterion Collection films are samurai films, because there's just something about those characters that are fascinating to explore.
Yeah, in a way, almost as much as Seven Samurai.
Yeah.
Yojimbo, I think, is the archetypal samurai film.
Absolutely.
And the character, because the character that Mifune plays in Seven Samurai is very different.
Yes.
And the character that he plays in Yojimbo, this is the iconic character.
Yes.
In the way that Seven Samurai is not.
Right.
Which is not to say Seven Samurai isn't one of the greatest films of all time.
Of course
Nothing about that. But just this Yojimbo Mifune character.
Yeah.
That's a lot. Now, strangely enough, I have no memory of the first time I saw Yojimbo.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it was in that college era when I was renting a whole bunch of Kurosawa films. I don't remember particularly seeing it.
Yeah.
I've seen it many times. I've known it for a long time.
Yeah.
Do you remember when you first saw it?
Yeah. Once again, when I was there in Charlottesville, I saw, because the thing that stuck with me was the opening score. Like just a great score, right? Great, the drums, the weird kind of beating on the wood, like all of that was going on through the beginning of the film has always stuck with me and stayed with me, because it was such an unusual beginning to a samurai film. And a lot of reviews that you read on Yojimbo tell you that it broke the convention of what had been a samurai film. And I would encourage people who are listening to, when you're done with this podcast, go onto Netflix and watch the biography, the documentary on Toshiro Mifune, and they go all the way back to the 1900s, and they legitimately have film of samurai films from the 1920s, 1910s.
See, I haven't seen this documentary.
Oh, you've got to. It's so good, and it's fascinating to see the progression of the samurai film from what had been, in essence, a glorified kabuki theater, or with these tropes and these cliches, to what Kurosawa did, which was elevate the genre out of what had essentially been a B-movie genre into something that was completely different. And Yojimbo is essentially a Western, obviously, but it's also breaking the conventions that had been going for such a long time.
So I want to, before we get into it, I think we got two big, huge personalities in this film. We've got to do a little bit of background on them. I actually just reread Kurosawa's autobiography to prep for this. I didn't read Emperor and the Wolf.
No, should you?
Yeah, I mean, I struggled through that book a few years ago when it came out. It's a big, thick book about Mifune and Kurosawa, and I didn't have the...
It's 970 pages in paperback.
Yeah.
That's how big of a book it is.
It's a lot of book.
It is.
But Kurosawa is something like an autobiography. It's like 150 pages, so much easier to get through. And he's got a fascinating life, and I don't want to go spend too long on it, but I do want to go into a little detail, because there's some things that happen in his life which I think are really thematic in terms of his filmmaking. So the first thing is he comes from an old samurai family, and his father's a famous soldier who becomes essentially like the PE teacher at his school. And one of the interesting things about his father, who cares a great deal about kendo and Japanese, which kendo is Japanese or swordsmanship, and cares about calligraphy and traditional Japanese sort of samurai values. But he also likes baseball and basketball, and he brings Western sports and stuff into his world, and he likes American films and French films, and he exposes Kurosawa as a young man to all that stuff.
Right.
And there's this, right at the beginning, this mix that we see with Kurosawa is a love of very traditional Japanese stuff, but a total openness to the West and other art and other ideas coming from other places.
Yeah.
So he grows up. Seems like he was a pretty interesting kid. He had a really strong relationship with he had two older brothers, but the middle older brother, who's about 4 years older than him, really strong relationship with him and really idolized him. And he was around in 1923. There was the Great Kanto earthquake, which pretty much wiped out Tokyo. Tens of thousands of people were killed. There's a huge fire. And his brother said, "Come on, Akira," and he took him out to where all the destruction is, where there are literally thousands of dead bodies, of corpses everywhere. And he forces his little brother, who's 13 at 12, 13 at the time, to look. And he wanted to look away. And he's like, "No, you have to see all of this." And they did all day. They looked at dead bodies.
Wow.
And that seems like it had a profound effect on Kurosawa. And that combined with what happened in World War II, because they're literally, when he's first becoming a director and working as assistant director, is during the firebombing of Tokyo. You know, like he is surrounded by death and destruction. And it seems to me, this is my feeling, and you see it in Yojimbo, you see it in Seven Samurai, you see it in Ron, is that Kurosawa is sort of fascinated by this moment when the world falls apart. You know, what do you do when the structure and the society suddenly isn't working the way it's supposed to?
Yeah.
And we're in chaos. And do you become a hero or a villain? And what happens to us without that structure? That seems to me to be a big theme with Kurosawa.
Absolutely. I think that absolutely applies to Yojimbo, and especially it's not just hero, villain, coward,
right?
Or just a cog in the system in order to survive, right? You remove all nobility from your survival because it's just about surviving.
Right.
And we see this in Yojimbo because there's two bosses in one town.
Right.
And in one of the opening exchanges that Sanjuro has with the old man who's running the restaurant is like, the old man says there should only be one boss. It's easier when there's one boss, right? So you're talking about chaos is two bosses because the town can never just move forward. It's constantly stuck in a perpetual state of balance, but not in a good way.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and the same in Ron. Suddenly there's multiple bosses, essentially.
Yeah.
Well, and in Seven Samurai, it's like we have these, we're constantly seeing the villagers who are just trying to get by. Are they just trying to live? And same with the innkeeper in Yojimbo. It's like, we're just trying to live our lives here.
Right.
And yet we're caught in the middle of this chaos. So Kurosawa tries to be a painter. That's kind of his first work. And obviously you can see the painterly qualities he's going to show later on.
Yeah.
And his older brother that he idolizes is a silent film narrator, which is this weird art form that happened particularly in Japan. Is there were these people who became quite famous, and they would talk you through the silent film, and they would play different characters and give their voices and explain things that are happening on screen, and they became like stars in their own right.
Wow.
And his older brother becomes one of these guys, and then what happens is the silent film era ends, and he goes out of work, and his older brother kills himself.
Wow.
Yeah, and 4 months after that, his eldest brother, who he wasn't close to, also died. And
died or killed himself?
Died.
Just died.
Died.
Okay.
Yeah, so he lost both his brothers, including the one he idolized, to suicide. And that put him just into a depression and trying to figure out what to do with his life. And he ended up applying for this job at what became Toho Studios as an assistant director. And one of the things we should explain is that an assistant director at this time in Japan is totally different from what an assistant director is in the United States.
Yes.
Because you hear, assistant director, that's the person next in charge to the director doing director stuff.
Right.
But that's not what it is in the United States. An AD in the United States is unbelievably hard job. It takes incredible talent and organization and the logistical skill and an amazing temperament. But it's not a creative job. The assistant director is the person who runs the set. And their job, whether you're making a horror film or making a sci-fi film, whatever, their job is just to make stuff happen. And it's really difficult. I don't mean any disrespect to ADs. It's an amazing job, but that's not what happened in Toho Studios when Akira Kurosawa joined. What they wanted their assistant directors to do was this was the training ground to become a director. And
Which it should be.
which, yeah, I mean,
Right.
well, and this is the thing. In our world today, there is no training ground to become a director.
Not really.
Yeah, someone's like, oh, you wrote a great screenplay, and now you get to be a director. But
Yes.
you might have no experience with cameras or actors or editing.
Right.
You know, so, oh, you're a great cinematographer, now you get to be a director, but you might not know anything about actors or screenwriting.
Right.
You know, and what Kurosawa went through was he was trained, in particular from this director Yamada, who he worked with a lot, who he called Yama-san, and Yamada forced him to write scripts, and then forced him. He would do things like he would shoot half the day, and he would go, okay, Akira, you finish out shooting the day, and he would leave. Because he was like, he wanted to force him to, he saw something in Kurosawa, and he wanted to he forced him into the editing room, and he made him re-edit. Like, he would have his editor editing things, and he would have Kurosawa editing things, and he would, you know, dismiss it and go, no, it's not good enough, and he would force him to work with composers over and over again. And this goes on for 5 years, where he works with this guy, and that's really where it gets formed. Then his first film is Sanshiro Sugata, which he makes in the middle of World War II for very little money. And by the way, that Sanshiro Sugata, my first screenplay, I wrote an adaptation of that.
Oh, wow.
That's the first thing I wrote.
Huh.
And it becomes a big hit.
Yeah.
And his career goes up and up and up until he meets this young actor named Toshiro Mifune. And Mifune was born in China, which I didn't remember. Lived his first 17 years of his life in China. His parents were Japanese, and they were Methodist ministers that were out trying to convert the Chinese. And then he comes back right at the beginning of World War II. He becomes an aerial photographer. And then he ends up working in the camera department at Toho. And someone, not to his knowledge, submits him for this acting search. And where there's like, we're looking for new faces. And so he goes, okay. And he comes in audition, and Kurosawa's off shooting a movie somewhere else on the set. And someone comes up to him and says, you got to come see this guy.
Right.
And they bring Kurosawa over, and he sees this guy that is just furious, raging, and he realizes he's acting. And the guy sits down, but the rage is still in him, and he's just glaring at the judges who are judging this contest, and they decide to dump him. They're like, we don't want this guy.
Yeah, he's too emotional.
And Kurosawa and Yamada, his sort of teacher, they both make this plea. No, you got to keep this guy.
Yeah.
And Kurosawa, he first acts for this director Yamada. In his second film, Kurosawa casts him in the lead in Drunken Angel.
Yeah.
And they make 16 movies together. I mean, this is one of the great collaborations in film history.
Yeah, people talk Scorsese to De Niro.
Exactly.
This is better.
Beyond.
Yeah, because they only did a few, or Scorsese and DiCaprio. This is better. This is something else, because they created masterpieces together, right? And they both inspired each other and drove each other, fueled each other, until eventually
It fell apart.
Yeah, they fell apart, and they could never come back together. And they never, in the documentary, the Mifune documentary, Kurosawa never went to visit him after they broke up. Like he had said, he sent a beautiful eulogy to Mifune after he passed, and Kurosawa died like 9 months later, 8 months later. But he sent him this beautiful eulogy, but he never showed up to like say goodbye to him, and to like never. And as Mifune was dying of cancer, and he just never did. So it was just fascinating to see that it broke up so hard. And there's the nobility in that too, because the Japanese are proud people, right? So, but yet they have this history of subjugation within their own culture. Samurai is supposed to subjugate, right? When the servants serve, they like bow down. The bowing down is how you say hi. What we see as subjugation is honor to them, is respect to them, right? But once the relationship broke apart, it's fascinating that they couldn't find a way to put it back together as they got older, because you would think that would be something that would happen, as you get older in life.
It's so hard because first, as a young man, I would hear about stories of, these two brothers that didn't talk to each other, and I'd go, well, how do you do that? How do you not make up? And then as I've grown older, now I've been around them. Yeah. And now I even have one in my life. Right. And it's one of those things about growing older is you suddenly go, oh, that's how. Yeah. That's how that happens. And it's so sad because you look at like, this is one of the great artistic collaborations of all time. Yes. And the fact that and neither of them would be who they were without the other. Absolutely. And they both must know that. Yes. They both must know that. Yes. And yet they cannot, after Redbeard, that's it. They can't. Yeah. Yeah. And in this film, and we'll talk about it a little more as we progress, but in this film, unknowingly, he is introducing the person who's going to replace Mifune, which is Tatsuyara Nakadai, who comes in and takes as the guy who holds the gun or wields the gun throughout the whole film. That is the guy who will take Mifune's place as his muse up until the last films, almost. Yeah, that's just, and it's an interesting thing because I understand, like 60 movies to make with someone, that's a lot.
It is a lot. 16, yeah.
And one of the things about Kurosawa is he did work with the same group of people over and over again.
He's very loyal.
Yeah, very loyal. He liked his group of actors. And it's interesting, like even between Yojimbo and Sanjuro, which is the sequel to Yojimbo, he has actors coming back who died in the movie before.
Exactly.
You know, which is weird. Which is one thing if you have characters that are unrelated, but when you have the same character again, so maybe that guy's dead. All right, so let's get into the movie.
Yeah, let's do it.
We have a great opening shot of these mountains and the back of Mifune's head.
Yeah.
And that music, which is, I think Saito is the name of the composer.
Yes.
And it is just, you're instantly, something's going on here. Just Mifune's presence on screen is just powerful.
Yeah.
It's really powerful. And he's kind of like the mountain in this film.
Yeah.
You know, he is so unmovable and unknowable. You know, and you see it right at the very beginning.
From behind.
From behind.
And this is really important. From behind. We're already, like, he's already a mystery to us. Like what they've done with, obviously, what they do later with Man with No Name, with Clint Eastwood and Sergio Leone borrowing liberally from Kurosawa. We see...
Stealing.
Okay, sure, stealing. But we see this situation here coming in, and it's perfect because it's not... He doesn't convey that kind of necessary nobility, but he conveys a strength of this samurai. That's from behind. We have to come to him, right? You said the mountain. The mountain does not come to Muhammad.
Right.
Muhammad's got to come to the mountain sometimes.
Well, this is the thing with Mifune is that the traditional samurai thing is perfection.
Yes.
And Mifune's kind of dirty.
Yes.
You know, he is gruff and dirty and
unshaven.
Unshaven.
Yeah.
And he's clearly, you know, he's wearing something that has a crest that seems to come from a family.
Yes.
But he's been through some times.
Yeah.
You know, and he comes to a crossroads and he picks up a stick and looks at where the stick falls and that's where he goes.
Yeah.
What a great way to introduce a character.
That's right. Oh, and also those are cemetery. Are those headstones? I feel like those are headstones, or maybe they're directions. I don't know. Maybe
I always thought they were milestones.
Maybe they're milestones. They're milestones. You're probably right. But
Yeah.
it just seemed like odd on every corner where he's standing. There are milestones. So it's just interesting.
Maybe
to me.
it could be. I don't know. We have to get our Japanese expert.
That's true.
When you're listening to this, please let us know what those are.
Exactly.
And he comes up to this father and son having an argument.
Yeah.
Son wants to go to town. Father wants to keep him on the farm. Mifune sort of listens, gets a drink, and the father starts getting angry. And the father, which is a really interesting moment, to show some disrespect to Mifune.
Yes.
Which is really surprising.
Well, because he's a Ronin.
Yeah.
He sees him initially, and he sees him and he gives him water. But then, and this is what's fascinating about this whole exchange that happens between the father and the son, then the father and the wife, and then the father and his wife, and then Mifune. It is 1961, this film.
Right.
This is when the 60s are happening, this whole beginning of this process of the young generation pushing back against the old generation, wanting something different. So it's fascinating to hear this dialogue in 2017 happening in 1961, which is based out of what in the 1700s, 1800s, whenever this is set. So this whole idea that's a universal thing that kids, it's always the generation that's after you that supposedly wants it easier than your generation. But every generation before and after says the same thing. You know, those kids, they want money. They just want to gamble and make that money easy. And why didn't you stop him? And you can't stop kids these days, you know. And then you treat the outsider who's listening so terribly. And he makes this comment about the government. I think it's a veiled attack at Japan's system of government at that time as well.
Well, let me add some stuff to this. So first of all, the movie takes place in 1860.
1860, okay.
And 1860 is a really important moment in Japanese history because the Tokugawa shogunate, which is the Edo period, starts in 1600.
Yeah.
And that's what actually the story of Shogun is that the Toranaga character in Shogun is really Tokugawa.
Okay.
And Tokugawa who takes over, conquers Japan, unifies it, and then has an extremely strong bureaucratic government covering all of Japan for the next 268 years.
Right.
So we are in the collapse of the Edo period.
Right.
So that really strong bureaucracy that had ruled Japan so well is now falling apart. So this is a key transitional moment in history, and he, the wandering samurai, is representing the older culture.
Right.
And what happens when essentially the emperor becomes, because the emperor had been a figurehead under the shogun for like 1,000 years, and the next period the emperor becomes in charge again.
Yeah.
And the first thing they do is eliminate the samurai class, and they go away. So this is the dying older system, represented by Mifune, and the newer system represented by the the emperor and the merchant class.
Yeah. Which you see in Last Samurai,
Right.
to a degree, the Tom Cruise movie.
It's exactly the same era.
Exactly.
This is an era we look at a lot. And to translate that to 1961 in Japan, is that in 1945 that period run by the emperor, the militaristic period, also ended, and it's now being replaced by the merchant manufacturing period. And because this is in the mid 50s on through the 60s is the rise of manufacturing Japan, where the merchant class and the manufacturing business class became ascendant. And so they are this generation is rejecting the military Japanese empire era in favor of what is the new Japan. And so this is, again, so both when the movie is made and when the movie takes place are in these transitional moments. And it seems like, again, that's where I think Kurosawa likes to be.
Yeah.
He likes to be in this transitional moments.
And I think this is important for people who are filmmakers or writers or script. Like, you can comment subtly about what is happening around in your world and still make it fit within your movie. And nothing that is in a movie is in a classic movie, in a good movie, is in for no reason.
Right.
There's no reason.
Absolutely
right.
correct.
There's no reason they're having this argument about the silk and the fair and who should be and kids and gambling and all. That's all meant to speak about what's currently happening in the government and also what was happening at that time. Because you're right. 8 years later, everything falls apart, but it doesn't fall apart overnight. It's a progression.
Right.
And 1860 is just about coming to the end of that progression. So yeah, it makes sense. It's fantastic script work.
And he walks into this town. And we get immediate sense the town is something weird's going on here, and he's maybe being watched. And then what is the first thing he sees?
The dog with the hand. The dog with the cut off hand in its mouth, which is perfect.
It is one of the most iconic moments in film of all time.
And the score is perfect too. There's just it's almost a happy score in that moment.
Yeah.
And Kurosawa and Mifune's smirk. You know, almost like just kind of like interesting. It's you know, that's what it seems like he's saying.
Well, and what it's telling us too is we're not supposed to take this that seriously.
Yes,
you know what I mean. This isn't that
absolutely
dramatic. We don't feel that bad for this. We're just like, oh, what's he walking into? And it's kind of fun. And this is really different from the way films have been in the past.
Right.
One of the ways that this is really iconic is that we're gonna have a really violent movie. It's very violent, particularly for the time.
Yeah.
And we're going to like it. We're going to enjoy it.
Yeah. I'm sure Peckinpah was influenced by this to a degree.
He's got to be.
Yeah,
He's got to be.
Yeah.
And one of the things, by the way, that Kurosawa loves using, particularly in this film, is really, really long telephoto lenses.
Yes.
And that, I think they said that shot of the dog is like a 500 millimeter lens. And that is really, what you have to do is you have to make sure the focus, where you can focus is very small. And so every step that dog takes, there's a first assistant camera person pulling focus, so they're rotating a knob from a long way away, and dogs' movements are unpredictable. And what Kurosawa says over and over again is that the first assistant cameraman on this movie were geniuses, artists, because that shit is hard. That is really follow focus on a dog with a 500 millimeter lens. That is tough. So we meet the town official, who comes out, and it just, all the stuff is weird.
Yeah.
He kind of says, hey, kind of tries to make a little deal, make a little money off Mifune. And
one Rio, finder's fee.
Finder's fee.
Yeah, that's what he wants.
Those Rio, man, we're gonna be, a lot of them are gonna get thrown around.
Hey, yes.
We here comes our first gang, including a giant with a hammer.
It's so amazing.
Yeah.
To see that. Right? It's unsettling.
I don't know. I look at him and I go like, does he have like the Andre the Giant disease or something?
Maybe for a Japanese person, yeah.
Because he's got those sort of swollen features, that are so odd, that seem like kind of overgrown.
High cheekbones.
Yeah. And again, this is sort of telling us we're not in a serious film.
Yes.
This is sort of fantasy in its way.
And also because this guy is, and what Kurosawa does interestingly in this film is use these stock characters or these ancillary characters as exposition.
Absolutely,
right? Because this official explains to him that there's two gangs in the town and they've been fighting each other. And so he comes down, he walks in front of this first gang, and these scraggly guys come out and they make a comment about him being a dog, and he's free to walk walk the streets just like a dog. They're making fun of him. But Sanjuro's character is so strong and powerful and knowledgeable, he doesn't have to address them. He doesn't have to have any back and forth with them. He just turns around, because he gets the idea of he's a seasoned guy, he's a veteran, so he understands real danger and fake danger.
Right.
And those guys are just putting on airs. And so he walks away from them, and the official's like, wow, you did it wrong. You should be busting out your chest. You should do those kinds of things. But it's like, that's not Sanjuro's character.
No.
That's not how you show actual strength.
Yeah.
That's how a fake person would show strength.
Well, and we get that stuff right away.
Yeah.
By the way, I think I got the years wrong.
Oh, okay.
Because it's actually 1885 is when the Edo period ends.
Oh, okay.
And I think this take place in 1880.
Okay. Okay. So 1880.
Yeah, I think I said the years wrong.
Okay.
Anyway,
No
so
worries.
forgive me if I got the years not quite right.
Yeah.
So he goes into this inn.
Yeah.
And this becomes one of our key sets. And one of the brilliant things about this sets is every wall has panels
Yeah.
that slides and opens, and there's light streaming through it at all time. And what it does is it creates these essentially frames, picture frames, to look through and see the world. And this is one of the things we should say is, and I think we mentioned it when we did The Searchers, is when someone asked Kurosawa, how did you come up with your beautiful, what did you study? Did you study Rembrandt? Did you study Da Vinci? And he said, no, I just watched John Ford movies.
Yep.
And you could see you could see some of those framing shots from The Searchers, and you could see them right here.
Yeah.
The love. And by the way, so it's 1945, the war has just ended.
Yeah.
He's shooting a movie. And at the time, the American occupation forces are supervising all the industry in Japan.
Yeah.
And so a bunch of Navy admirals and people come by the movie set, and they might be censors, and they come by, and one person kind of talks to him for a minute, and they leave, and only a month later does he find out that was John Ford. Wow. That he met one of his heroes and didn't know that it was him, and only found out when he met Ford again later in the 50s, and he said, oh, we've already met. And he was, what? Yeah.
How fascinating.
Yeah. And so in this scene with this innkeeper, we get kind of the exposition of what's going on in the town.
Yeah.
Which is there's two gangs, and there's one guy who kind of was the second in command of the gang, and he's left. And one gang is kind of associated with the sake merchant and with the brothel, and the other gang is associated with the silk merchant.
Right.
And it is not good, as you said, to have two bosses in the town.
Two bosses, two mayors.
Yep.
It's just it's a town fractured, completely fractured and split in half. It's essentially a civil war every day.
Yeah.
In that town.
Yeah. And it doesn't seem like there's any world out there to help. This is just a messed up town.
No.
And Mifune goes, oh, let me think and drink about this.
Yeah.
Why does he stay?
I think because he's a wandering samurai. So for him, he's a Ronin. He's exploring the world. The fact, and I think we get this because when he throws the stick up in the air, that lets you know the mentality that he's at in his life right now. He is just wandering from town to town, almost like Kung Fu. We would see later with David Carradine in Kung Fu. Almost, and it helps him to stay that hero aspect because he's choosing to stay when the innkeeper is like, you got to go, you got to get out of here. I'll give you free food. Just get the hell out of here. It's not a place for you to be in, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, no, I think I'll stay. And I think there's a part of him that he understands that he can figure something out in this town. And then later, I think it progresses to the point where he can actually save the town. And I don't think he essentially wants to save the town at first. I think it's more a matter of experience. Sometimes you're in a position in life where you're like, I just want to see what happens. And you're not necessarily thinking everything out.
Well, he says at one point, these men deserve to die.
Later on, yes.
Yes. But it's like, it's because he's a little bit unknowable, this Sanjuro character. Like what he really feels about stuff.
Yes.
I mean, he is clearly a hero.
Yes.
But whether or not, what his self-interest, what's he getting out of this is a little hard to figure out. It's not money. He doesn't actually care about the money, although he continually asks for money.
Yes.
And it's a really odd. Normally when we're developing characters, we go like, what is their motivation? And the audience needs to understand what their objective is because that's how movies work. And this is one where you kind of go, I don't know.
Right. And I think because of the force of the actor that is Toshiro Mifune, he is essentially an empty vessel that we ourselves can put our ideas or our heroic expectations or our thoughts into and then let it play out as the film goes on to see if we were right or wrong. And the townspeople do that too. Because he presents a certain aspect about himself. He does not explain his plans necessarily, even to the innkeeper, fully. He's got his own ideas of how he's going to play this thing out, and that's why he drinks the sake to kind of just figure out what his overall plan is going to be on this. But then, of course, X factors pop in, and he has to roll with them, which is what makes the movie so interesting. Yeah.
Well, and what we're going to see throughout is that other people kind of put their motivation on him.
Yes.
Like they see him a certain way and then they react to him and deal with him in the way that fits their expectations.
Right. And he plays with them.
He knows that's what's going on.
Yeah.
So he goes off to pick a fight. goes down to Ushitora, who's the silk merchant one, and goes up to his guys, and they posture in front of him, and like there's the line in there that's sort of like, I've got the death penalty in 16 quadrants or whatever.
Right.
It's just like this is some pit of scum and villainy here,
right?
And their outfits, their costumes are just ridiculous bad guy costumes,
and their faces too are not standard typical Japanese faces. I think that's important to point out as well. He wanted to convey this kind of like unsettling looking type of samurais. They're all dirty samurais. You know, there's no nobility here.
These are scum. I mean, they're bad guys. They're like, there's nothing subtle about these characters,
right?
And which is good because he doesn't want us to feel bad when Mifune wipes him out, which he's going to in just a moment,
right?
He and the sword fight is really fast.
Yes,
I don't know if you did. I replayed it 5 times.
Oh, not 5 times, but I've certainly watched it many times to see the movements.
Yeah,
you know,
and Mifune moves great.
Yeah,
he's by the way, the kendo choreographers are guys from the Yakuza on this movie.
Oh, great.
And Mifune's movements are just they're really good. Having tried to use a Japanese sword for a long time, it's really hard.
Yeah,
he's good.
One of the things Kurosawa says in one of the documentaries is that Mifune has to hold his breath every time he does the sword movements. So they could only shoot in bursts.
Right.
Because he'd be out of breath by the time he was done with any kind of movement, because holding a breath that long to kind of... So it's fast. That's why he looks so fluid when he's doing it, because it's just a focus on moving the sword. There's not a focus on breathing and moving and do all this other extra stuff, and that allows for an interesting movement. We should go back real quick, though, through the exposition in the inn. Before he goes down and confronts these guys, we see the half-wit brother of the other...
Good point,
Yes, Kino, which is... what a great characterization by this actor. The teeth all fucked up.
The
his
weird
face,
unibrow.
The weird unibrow, his big fat face. Like, all of it just works so perfectly to show you someone that you cannot necessarily quantify, because, like, he warns you, he's dumb, but he's insane. And so the menace of it is always there at any moment. So then he goes back and confronts the guys,
right?
Because he just wants to figure out how to do this, you know. And so I love it, the confrontation.
Absolutely, wipes him out.
Yes,
and we have a severed arm, which again is really big violence for 1961. And he says, and he comes back and says, need 2 coffins. I'll make that 3.
Right. And what's great about the cutting off the arm is exactly what the official said to him. You should have cut off one of their arms, then they'd really take you seriously. Right. And he does it.
Yeah,
he has a kind of like
and by the way, the coffin maker in Kurosawa says he got that from High Noon.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, said he liked the sound of the hammering.
Of course, brilliant.
You know, Picasso's line of "good artists borrow, great artists steal." That's definitely there's a lot of truth in there.
It's true.
And so now he's established who he is in this town, and he goes over to see the other boss, which is Sebe.
Yeah.
And says, "Hey, what do you offer me?"
Right.
You know. And they offer him 50 ryu, which seems like a lot of money.
Initially, offer him 3.
Yeah.
I need to have Mifune come negotiate for me sometime.
Right?
It's amazing.
Well, maybe you need to just kill a few people before you get your next job.
Perhaps you don't understand that I meant business.
Yes, we'll cast you. Yes, sir.
Oh, yes, anything you want. Just stop killing our ADs.
Oh, jeez. And he gets this offer, and he's going to be their bodyguard, which, by the way, Yojimbo means... Bodyguard,
yes.
Yeah, that's what the meaning of the word is. And he takes the offer.
Yeah.
And while he's sitting there, he manages to overhear the wife talking to Sebe. She's not a very nice person.
No.
And she says, "Okay, that's too much money. I'll tell you what, let's let him lead us to victory over the other boss. Right. And then after that, we'll kill him."
Right. And this speaks to the dynamic of that family, right? You have initially what you thought was like he was subservient, the boss, and he was like offering him 50 Rio and giving him half up front. But the woman is the one who runs the business, right? We see this a lot in Kurosawa's films, that the women are actually running the situations. Very powerful. And people don't speak about that enough in the Kurosawa films, I feel. People get lost in Mifune stuff and all that, but a lot of his female characters, he gives them a lot of strength to play, a lot of powerful characters to play. And when the actresses speak about him in the documentaries now, or that you see, they speak with such reverence about him, because those characters were probably not written that or fleshed out that well during those times. And in that moment, you also see the dynamic of the prostitutes. They're not going to tell on him because they know that he's one of them in essence, right? He's been through this kind of battle in his own life. So him listening in, they're not going to betray him, even though he's a new person. They sense that there's something about him that they can trust.
Well, in these two moments, I think you point out that these are so important because if the wife doesn't say, let's kill him after, and Mifune jumps ship and goes to the other side, then he's the bad guy.
Right.
But because you hear the wife do this, and because you see the prostitutes are not fans of the wife, then we go, oh, Mifune's free.
Yeah.
Because they are evil.
Right.
And it's really important to establish that. And then we meet the other sensei.
Yeah, Mosa.
Who's not getting paid nearly so well.
2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you know who that is?
No.
That is Sanshiro Sugata. That is the lead character of Kurosawa's first film.
So that's what that's insane, Steve.
Yeah.
So he has 3 generations of his
what
leads
I
in one film.
Yeah. I thought about saying it when you brought up the other guy earlier. Yeah. Yeah.
Shit! So that Sugata moment when he's climbing the fence,
yes,
it's him saying to Mifune, "Good luck with Kurosawa. I'm out."
Yeah.
Wow, dude!
Isn't that cool?
That's meta within meta, man. I love that you told me that. All right, cool.
And what I wonder is,
so awesome.
Was Kurosawa doing it on purpose?
Yes, of course he was doing it on purpose.
I guess, as you said earlier, everything's on purpose.
Yes. What honor for Kurosawa to know that he was doing that, and then the actor to be like, "I will do that scene with you." That's so awesome. Anyway, all right.
Yeah. So the sensei said, just as you said, climbs the fence and gives this little smile and wave, which is so basic. You're on your own, buddy.
Yeah.
And it's such a great moment. And now it's time to get ready for this battle. And all of Seibei's guys come out and they're ready to get helped by Mifune. And he's kind of sitting up there, not coming down to help.
Not necessarily. The 2 people have to come and try and get him.
Yeah.
And then he finally comes down and throws the Ryo on the ground and says, "No, you were going to betray me, so screw you. I'm out of here."
Yep. And then he goes over and climbs up this watchtower.
Yes.
In the middle of the town. It's an amazing shot.
Yeah, man.
And then you see, and what's fun, and it's like there are a lot of different ways to handle battles, and there are a lot of different ways to handle bad guys.
Yeah.
And these guys it's funny to watch them.
Yeah.
They're scared. They're clearly not very good. There's a lot of posturing. Like, I'm going to get you. No, I'm not. Oh, I'm not. And Sanjuro's having a ball.
He is. I used to play this game on the computer called Samurai Total War. I bought it as a CD-ROM you could play, and it was fascinating.
What's that?
Yeah, CD-ROM. And what's interesting is that the same thing would happen from above. You would see you could move your forces, and they would rush and attack, and the other forces would pull back, and then they would attack, and then you would pull back. So you see what's happening in the film. It happens in the game, but also for me, and I don't want to get too much into this, but like, it felt like I was watching Republicans and Democrats in Congress, and we're waiting for this one president to come in who's going to be able to negotiate the crap that's happening now. One side is posturing, the other side backs down, then the other side postures, and that posture back down, or that side backs down. And it just felt like you're watching government in action. It just felt like to me.
So you feel like having some rogue come into Congress night now,
yes,
pit one side against each other until they foolishly wipe each other out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Might be a good thing.
It might not be a bad thing.
Might not be a bad thing. And yet this battle never actually happens.
No,
because an inspector comes from Edo.
Yeah,
and suddenly everyone has to pretend that everything's cool here.
Yeah, they make all the shopkeepers open their windows. They make all the fugitives hide. All that kind of crap. Yeah.
Yep. And Mifune again sits in this inn, and opening his slides, he's able to observe every single thing that goes on and watch everybody kiss the ass of the Yedo inspector.
Right.
And again, we see, as you said, this period is ending, but it's still powerful.
And Mifune questions the how this nobody of an inspector has such a palanquin, I think is what he said. Such an expensive looking palanquin, and it's because he's taking
corrupt
money from everybody. Yeah, he's corrupt.
Well, and it also shows this is why this is the end of this era.
Yes.
Because in the early period of the Tokugawa shogunate, you did not break those rules.
No.
It was a very, very strong central government.
Yeah.
By this point, we're going to take a little bit of money.
That's right.
And then I think this is the first time we see Takashi Shimura, who is the sake merchant.
Yes.
And this is weird for me.
In the film, for some we see him in the film.
Yeah. Takashi Shimura is another one of Kurosawa's guys, and he is the lead in Seven Samurai.
Yeah,
He's the general, and he is amazing. And what's weird to me about this is there are a lot of actors who were leads in films in Hollywood, and then they're not getting the parts anymore. But you never see them show up as a bit player in a movie. You know what I mean?
Like, sometimes you see cameos, sometimes, but you don't see it like this.
Not like this.
No.
He's not doing a cameo.
No, he's not.
He's doing a bit part.
Yes.
And that's weird to me.
But this also speaks to the British-Japanese connection, too, because in British films, you'll see that. Sometimes an actor who has worked with a director for a long time will come and play a particular part for a small scene, 2 or 3 scenes, to help the film give it a little bit of power. Like John Gielgud showing up in Gandhi. What's that all about? It's only a small part, but he's in there for 2 or 3 scenes. But that happens, because there's not that sense of status necessarily. It's more about the work and the service of great work. You know?
But Gielgud comes in as Gielgud. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Whereas this guy just comes in as a bit part. I don't know. That's just how it feels to me.
Okay.
It doesn't feel like he's given a lot of weight. You know, I don't know. It just seems weird. It seems like
because he's playing. Isn't he playing the mayor, or who's he playing? Who's he playing?
He's the mayor who's the silk merchant.
Yeah.
Guy who's
but you're like I said, he likes to work with the same guys over and over again. So stock.
Absolutely. Yeah, he loves these guys, and they all come back. And as we saw with the Sanshiro Sugata guy, and we got we have these guys coming back.
The only guy who didn't was Mifune, which is always fascinating. Yeah.
So. Really, both sides want to bribe Mifune.
Yeah,
now.
of course.
They both want him on the team because now he's gotten this reputation as like, this is the guy.
Yeah.
And now we get to have one of the great elements in Kurosawa films, which is rain.
Oh, yeah.
Rainy day. Man, Kurosawa shoots rain better than anybody else I can think
I
of.
would agree with you 1,000%.
From Rashomon and Seven Samurai, and in this, it's just like thick, heavy, pouring down. Must have been just horrible to shoot in rain. And we're all waiting for the inspector to go. And the giant and Ushitora shows up, and we see the arrival of our guy with a gun, Uno.
Yeah, which is Tatsuya Nakadai.
Yeah. His presence in the film is really powerful.
Yeah, man. He's such a fantastic actor and completely different energy than Mifune. There's a menace to Nakadai that is intrinsic in his personality as an actor, his presence rather as an actor. You see it in Sword of Doom. You see it in Ron. You see it in a number of films that Nakadai does for Kurosawa and other directors. And so it's and he's younger.
Yeah.
And it's so ironic because this is only, few years after Seven Samurai. Isn't it like how many years after Seven? Is it 10 years after?
7 years. I think Seven Samurai, my memory is like 54, maybe.
Okay. So it's
maybe
only
55.
7 years after this, which essentially Nakadai was essentially Mifune in Seven Samurai, the young upstart going nuts. Except in this, Nakadai is more, calmer, but he needs the gun. Right. That's his menace. That's a devilish type of character.
Well, and I want to talk just a little bit about guns and swords.
Yeah.
Because this is really important in this era, which is that in 1600, when the Tokugawa shogunate started, there was European influences, and they didn't like that.
Yeah.
So they limited all European connection, all trade to just Nagasaki and only with the Dutch, and only certain amounts of goods would come in.
Right.
And what the Tokugawa shogunate decided was Japan will be alone.
Yes.
We don't want influence from the rest of the world. So while all the rest of the world, trade is booming and different cultures are meeting, Japan stayed the same. And that is unlike anything that's ever happened anywhere else in history. And I think a lot of the really rarefied and specific traditions within Japanese culture come from this era of, because Japan is Japan, it really isn't like anything else.
Right.
And one of the things they didn't let in were guns. So the guns that were owned for the next 150 years were 150-year-old guns. Yeah. They didn't let any new guns in because they were really scared of guns. They wanted to keep warfare the way warfare had always been: swords and bows and arrows and horses. And they didn't want cannon and they didn't want guns. And so the fact that he has a revolver means that this is after 1855, I think it's 55, is when Admiral Perry comes and
Yeah.
opens up, forces Japan to open up, because that now we have the big, huge warships, and suddenly this really powerful military force of the Tokugawa shogunate goes, oh, we can't do anything.
Right.
And suddenly guns, more modern guns, revolvers and repeaters start coming in, and that's what this guy has. And so again, symbolically, this is the future facing the past.
Yeah.
And if you're the only guy with a gun, you're not unlike a god in a way. And he sure is happy about that gun.
Yeah.
It is fetishized in a way in this film.
That's agreed.
Yeah. So then we find out this inspector from Yedo gets killed in the next village.
Yes.
Yeah. And there are these...
Or is going to be killed in the next village.
Right.
Right.
And we meet these two drunks that apparently did the job.
Yep.
And Sanjuro finds out about it. Mm-hmm. And he starts to develop the next step in his plan.
Well, this is another good point you make, Steve. Well, this is another good thing you bring up, because one of those drunks is playing one of the co-leads in The Bad Sleep Well.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Oh, I didn't know
He's
that.
He's one of the co-leads in that
interesting.
film. Yeah. So you're right. It's these characters. All these actors just want to be in service of Kurosawa's work.
Yeah. And so you think Sanjuro is going to go off and kill these guys.
Yes.
But he does not.
It seems like he does initially.
You think he does.
Right.
He hits one guy in the chest with the scabbard, with the sheathed sword.
Right.
And then he cuts, and it looks like he's just wiped this guy out, but instead he just cuts his clothes off.
Right.
Which, that would be really impressive. That would be an impressive swords move.
But this is all happening because, the war's going to, the inspector's leaving that night. Then after the whole situation happens, they have a conversation, and the coffin maker, what do you call it? What do you call the coffin maker? You just want to call
I'll
him
call
that?
him the coffin
Coffin
maker.
maker comes back in, and he's all depressed, and it's like, why are you depressed? He's like, because they're talking about peace. And that's when Sanjuro says, well, this is even more dangerous, because
Right.
the innkeeper's all happy and stuff, but this is more dangerous. So Sanjuro kind of sets up this situation to reignite the problems between the two towns.
Right.
So it gets these guys that you're
Right.
talking
And
about.
Ushiro
Yep.
Tora, who's one of the bosses,
Yeah.
arranges for these two guys to kill the inspector.
Right.
And Sanjuro doesn't kill them, and instead he brings them to the other boss, Seibe,
Seibe.
and says, these guys killed the inspector on Ushiro Tora's orders.
Right.
Starting some shit.
Yeah, that's
man.
right. He just wants to make this conversation happen. Now, here's my question to you, Steve. Do you think he's right to do this? Because this is now him actively participating in creating the fight between them that was about to go to peace. Because we only have his word to believe when he says, oh, peace is almost worse, because they'll have an even worse fight. Like, do you think he's an active participant? Do you think there's some kind of blame here for
I
him?
was thinking about this a lot, and I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
I really don't know. And part of what's weird about this movie,
Yeah.
and this is not a criticism of the movie, but what's weird is we don't see a lot of town.
No.
What we see are the two gangs.
Yes.
And we see some prostitutes, and we see an innkeeper and a coffin maker.
Yeah.
That's it. Right. And a farmer who lives on the outskirts, and we meet another farmer,
Right.
Another couple people.
Couple mayors, the town,
but we don't see like the town.
Yeah.
So what essentially is going to happen in this film, and spoiler alert, is the whole town's going to get wiped out. Like basically, there's not going to be a lot of people left.
Yeah.
And so the statement of peace is going to be worse. It's like, well, how?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's not. I think the movie wants you to just feel really good that he's wiping these people out.
Yeah, I guess so.
I think that's what the movie wants us to feel. And I think, obviously the movie's successful, but yeah, I don't know.
But I think Kurosawa comments on it by having, and we'll find when we get to this the moment. I feel I'll comment on it again. So yeah,
Okay, so he hands the drunks over to Seibe. But then he goes back to Ushitora and tells him that, oh, Seibe got your assassins.
Yeah.
They got outed by somebody, and now he's got them. And, and this is like, oh, shit, what are we going to do?
So Ushitora offers him to be the bodyguard again, offers him money, all this kind of jazz, and he says, I'll think about it.
I'll think about it. He takes a lot of money. He goes, I'll think about it.
Think about it.
It's what's really one of the conceits that the movie works on is that nobody figures this guy out.
Until much later, but then it's too late by the time.
Yeah, it's like really, you're going to just keep offering this guy money when he's really not doing anything for you.
Right.
I know he's good with a sword, but
Right.
like they're all so aggressively trying to get Sanjuro to help them.
Yeah, because they think it'll tip the scales. Right.
And so what they grab is Yoshitora grabs someone who we didn't mention earlier, which is the son of Seibei.
Yes.
Is that there's a son who seems like kind of a whiner, not like a very cool guy, and he says, "Okay, well, we have your son, you have these two assassins. Let's make a trade."
Right.
And this is it's going to be 2 a.m.
Yeah.
And we ring the little, it's not ringing the bell, but we bang the sticks. And out come our two gangs with our hostages, and it is beautifully structured, formalistic, symmetrical shots.
Yes.
I mean, and this is again where you see Kurosawa has one of the great eyes in the world. You know, just every single thing in that frame looks perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things, by the way, he liked to shoot with multiple cameras at the same time, 2 or 3.
Wow.
He's shooting with these long lenses. There's incredible attention to detail. He has wind blasting. And Kurosawa, it sounds like he had a temper.
Yeah.
You know, he wanted to get what he wanted to get. He also really supported the people that he worked for, but if you messed up, you were gonna hear from him. Yeah. And the trade doesn't go well.
No.
Because Uno comes out and shoots the assassins.
Which makes sense because you don't want to leave any loose ends.
Yeah, because that's their point. Is
Right.
that we just don't care. We don't want them.
Right.
We just don't want them to mess us up.
So they threaten to keep, I think the guy's name is Yukiochi. They threaten to keep him, the son of Sabai. They threaten to keep him. And then...
And out comes the girl.
Yes.
Yeah, and so now we see this new person that we're holding hostages, which we sort of find out is the girlfriend, I think, of Takashi Shimura.
Yes.
Yeah, that he's into her. And so now we have a secondary hostage exchange, and we're going to do that tomorrow.
But it's interesting because Uno, as you say, Uno's reaction to it is almost like he has a affection
that's what
for
I
her
thought too.
Right? Initially, you think
that's
there's a connection between them.
Yeah, I find this moment in the film a little confusing.
Yeah.
And like having watched it now a couple of times and watched documentary about it and stuff, like it doesn't seem like Uno has a relationship with her, but that does seem like his reaction.
His reaction seems that way to me. So my thought was when I saw this and for this podcast again, like my thought is that maybe he has harbored feelings for her. So when he feels more, because he's come back, he's been on a trip, right? So in this woman, we find out later, this woman was married to another guy who like gave her up because he got tricked in this gambling situation and gave her, but like she's with this mayor, but Takashi Shimura's character, but maybe Nakadai, his character, has been angling to be with this woman too, and has been away for a while. Now that he's back, he's going to put his plans in motion.
Yeah, could be. Yeah. Definitely his reaction seems like something's
right?
going on.
Something a little more.
And now we're going to have another hostage exchange. This time it's in daylight. And now we introduce this little boy.
Yeah.
Because Mifune's sitting in the inn, and here's this little boy looking out at the woman and goes, "Mommy." And we also see this dad who's sitting sort of silently in the inn. And this is the first moment, I think, where there's any actual emotion.
Yes.
Like realistic emotion in the film. We've had a lot of fun up to this point, but this is like, oh, fuck, this sucks.
Yeah.
And we see them slowly going towards each other. And he screams, "Mommy," and that's rough. And she hears him and runs to the kind of slats on the inn wall. And this is kind of a hard scene.
Yeah. Yeah, and the husband too, like the sadness and the desperation in the husband as well. And Kurosawa does these in his films as well. It's really powerful when he has these moments in his films because he picks the right actors that really convey that kind of loss, that depth of loss in the situation.
Yeah, absolutely, and with very little because we don't get a lot of dialogue from these people, but we get what's going on here. They drag mom away from her son. Yeah. They make the exchange. The son of Seibei comes back, runs up to mom, "Mommy!" Same thing our little kid is yelling.
Yes.
He yells "Mommy" too. His mommy does not react as nicely.
No.
Slaps him right in the face.
He's a rich kid's son. It's a son of a rich people. It's sometimes a rich kid. There you go.
Yeah. Well, and his mom's not a nice person.
No, true. That's
true.
true.
I don't think she's been a very
loving mother
to this
ruthless,
guy. Yeah. And we almost think we're going to have this showdown, but again, we don't.
No.
Yeah. But now we go back to the end and we kind of hear what the story is of this young, beautiful woman, is that this guy, this is not a good guy. I'm not a fan of this young man who just wanted to make some money, put his house on the line,
and his wife,
and then he finally put his wife on the line gambling, and gambled his way away his wife.
Yeah. You know, and Kurosawa gives Mifune those lines of, I hate those kinds of men. I hate those kinds of men, and blah, blah, blah. And I do love the fact that when Mifune comes down off the tower before he walks in to have that conversation that he says to Uno's character, that was amusing. You were right. That was amusing. Because they turned it around. Yeah, they turned it around, which is a great moment. But when he walks in there and hears the story, it's their first glimpse, too, into this kind of like letting down the walls a little bit from Sanjuro's character, because he lets his anger get the best of him in that moment. And I hate guys like that. I don't like people like that, blah, blah, blah. But I think the combination is...
Except what he's going to end up doing.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
It's the combination of this whole idea of like this person and this woman and their child have messed up his plans, but it also exposes that he is a samurai and he has to do things that are noble, and so it pulls him out of this game that he's playing, and it reminds him of his duty. So I think there's a lot going on here for him as a character that is, you know, just working on multiple fronts.
Well, and but it's also where I kind of go like, was him saying I hate these people and that expression of anger, was that an act too?
No, Yes, I think that's an act in terms of that he's saying that out loud, but he does not believe it at all.
Yeah, I see, and I kind of, my feeling of it, and we can't know.
Sure.
We don't know the answer, but my feeling of it is he is feeling that, but he is using those feelings as an act. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, I see.
You know what I mean? Like sometimes, like it is a truth that he wouldn't, because he doesn't lose control of his emotions. So like he is intentionally expressing a thing that he's feeling to make people think a certain thing about him, which isn't actually the whole truth.
Right.
You know, but we don't know.
It also could be something that he himself has done.
Right. I was
because
thinking
he might
the same
hate
thing.
himself for having done this in the past.
Because again, who is this guy and why is he here?
Exactly.
And the answer is we don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah, we don't know. And so now, but at this moment, it seems that we've gone through a change, because now Sanjuro is going to get more involved.
Yes.
Like he's really been hanging back and trying to manipulating mostly from the outside.
Yeah.
And now he's going to go try to manipulate on the inside. He goes back to Ushitora and he actually takes the job as bodyguard.
Yes.
Yeah. And he's worried they're guarding this woman somewhere and they have 6 guys on her.
Yeah.
And he goes, this isn't enough. And he goes to Ino, who's the sort of half-wit brother, and kind of butters him up.
I love
and says, we need your strength. Let's go over and check this out.
That's my favorite. Ino's my favorite in this movie. I just love him to pieces.
He and the guy with the hammer.
Yeah.
Because they're just
the guy with the hammer,
so iconic looking people.
Yes.
You know? Oh, yeah. So they go off and he sends off Ino on a job. And while Ino goes away...
Yeah.
He wipes out those 6
guys.
Well,
he tells him that those 6 people have been wiped out because he reminds Ino that Ino has to beat up the husband.
Right.
So while Ino's running to beat up the husband of this woman who is supposed to be Takashi Shimura, he runs back over and tells him, all 6 guys are dead. The woman is gone. Go get blah, blah, blah. So he runs off because he knows he's stupid. He can manipulate him.
Yeah.
He runs off, and while he runs off, then he goes and kills it, which is a fantastic.
This one's great.
Battles.
It's really great. Well, first of all, the confidence of knowing I'm not going to have any problem wiping out these 6 guys, because that's what the plan is based on.
Right.
You know, he doesn't wipe out the 6 guys first.
No.
He goes and go do this, and that's going to be just enough time for me to wipe out. Now I have to explain a silly martial arts thing.
Okay.
Because I watch this fight scene a lot, and it's really, really fast.
It's fun,
but it's worth watching. Is that it's this idea of negative space, and this is what I will explain. So this started with, I'm playing video games in the 80s on some Nintendo game. It was like a space flying game. And you know those games where it's all kind of flat and you got a whole bunch of aliens you got to sort of fly between your spaceship,
right?
You know, and we got to like the final boss level and there's like 50 bad guys you're flying through and we just couldn't beat it. And then we finally went is like, you know, because it's just really flat and basic colors, is that instead of watching all the bad guys, if we watch the space between them and fly through that, we could do it.
Right.
So if you're trying to escape the bad guy, you couldn't do it. But if you just watch the space between the bad guys, you could. And this is how this applies to martial arts. Is that what you think of if someone's swinging a sword at you is that's the danger. And all your focus goes to the weapon.
Right.
And I want to stop that weapon. You're afraid of it. And what you need to do, and you can see Mifune do it in this fight scene beautifully, which is that what's happened when someone lifts the sword to cut down on you, what they are in fact doing is opening the door.
Yes.
And that here is a door you must now step through.
Right.
If you focus on the sword, you can't focus on the opening. So you want to focus on the negative space. And if you watch, he is always moving, cutting through that opening. He's cutting through the open door. And it's every cut is just beautiful. And something, if you don't know, a samurai sword, a katana, is razor sharp, and it's not a hacking weapon. So like a medieval knight in shining armor sword, they hack like an axe. The samurai sword is a slicing weapon. You want to cut with it like you do with a knife, which is sliding back and forth. And again, you can see this with Mifune. He slices through.
Yeah.
Doesn't hack. It is beautifully beautiful swordsmanship, and it lasts about 6 seconds.
Yeah.
You know, it is really fast. And then he's got to set the stage.
Right.
And this to me is like, this is like Orson Welles in
yes.
Citizen Kane destroying the bedroom.
Absolutely.
It is just great watching him wipe
It's
this
funny
one.
you say that, 'cause it's the exact thing I thought
Yeah.
when I was watching it again
Yeah.
this time. But he is, before he tears that place apart, he runs out, he tells
you're
the
right, you're
husband
right.
and the wife and the child, get out of here, here's 30 Ryo, go get as far away from here as possible. Then we see him tear the whole place apart.
You're right. Let's talk. We got to talk about that first,
Okay,
because
sure,
I'm so glad
sure.
you brought, because this is what we were talking about before.
Yeah.
We left him saying, "I hate this guy, this
Yeah.
husband."
Right.
We see him go take the money, and now he's giving the money to the guy he said, "I hate you," and go away. And this is like, oh, is he just a hero? And maybe he is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he is.
I mean,
And
this is a really heroic moment.
It is. And that's why they stay bowing to him when he walks out. And he's almost embarrassed by it, right? He's almost ashamed
Yeah.
by it, because he knows he's done a lot of terrible things. So to have these people kind of remind him that he is a samurai capable of nobility is almost embarrassing to him.
Right.
Right? And so that's why he gets them to finally leave.
Well, because what happens, he sets the scene,
Right.
and then he comes back out, and
Yeah.
they have returned, and they're bowing to him,
Yeah.
and he's like, idiots, like, what's wrong with you?
Right.
Because not only are you, it's nice that you're showing me this respect,
Yeah.
but you are going to get me killed.
And in
You
their
know?
in their delay is a great plot point, because it does come back later
Yeah.
that because they delayed so long, someone saw them crossing the bridge, and that's how Uno figures out that Sanjuro had something to do with it. So
Yeah, absolutely.
So anyway.
and now Ushitora's guys show up. They
Yep.
see this destruction, and obviously Seibe is responsible,
Right.
Because it would never occur to them that Sanjuro would do it.
Yeah.
And now we get these sort of retaliatory strikes back and forth. We burn the silk.
Yeah.
We the sake is destroyed, and the town starts filling with corpses. So many that the coffin guy is now upset again, because now nobody's even buying a coffin. There are too many corpses for the coffins.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it seems like, man, he's done it. He is
Yeah.
getting them to just wipe each other out.
And we see this in Westerns, the coffin maker, right? He becomes a character
Yeah.
in a number of Westerns. It's interesting, yeah.
Well, and this is one of the interesting things about this movie in particular. I think this is like at the focal point of it. Kurosawa is influenced by John Ford.
Yeah.
Loves those John Ford Westerns.
Yep.
Yojimbo, in turn, influences the next generation of Westerns,
Right.
which is The Man with No Name and Sergio Leone. And that's fascinating,
Yeah.
that you have American Westerns input leads to this Japanese film really affected by Westerns, which goes back to the Italian Westerns and the evolution of the Western after that.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Which seems like things are going pretty well. And we go back to the inn. Sanjuro's having a few drinks.
Yeah.
And the innkeeper brings in this letter. It's like a thank you note. Seems very nice. And they just leave that fucking thing on the table.
And then they do. They do. But it's also them, and he's so happy for him because he sees you were a hero. You are a hero.
yeah,
you
you're
are
not a
good
bad guy.
person.
You're a good
And
person.
he's like, shut up, leave me alone.
Shut up, let me drink.
Yeah, let me drink.
Yeah.
It's whole thing.
So he's kind of getting drunk. Doesn't
Yeah.
want to read that note.
No.
In comes Ino.
You know, right?
Yeah. And they this is funny autocorrect in my line.
Oh.
My autocorrect says they confront iTunes U re-family. I'm like, I don't know what that was. In comes Ino. They confront Mifune about this family.
Yeah.
Because they're starting to. This is where they're kind of starting to suspect.
Yeah.
And Sanjuro starts to notice that letter's sitting right at that table. The innkeeper notices the letters on the table.
Yeah.
Sanjuro does a pretty good job covering up the letter.
Right.
The innkeeper does a terrible job.
Because the innkeeper is not used to doing these kinds of things.
Yeah. And it gets caught. We see the letter. Cut to Mifune on the ground.
Yeah.
All beat up.
Right.
he's going to get the shit kicked out of him.
Well, and I think this is great, Steve, because once again, this speaks to his active participation. This is what I wanted to bring up. His active participation in restarting this war.
Yeah.
Because he actively participated, he cannot escape without scars or some kind of payment.
Right.
And I think him getting beat up, and to this level that he gets beat up by the giant guy, is his payment for restarting the battle.
Yeah,
that's in my opinion.
You're
Narratively,
saying, like you saying karmically?
Karmically, yeah,
yeah.
Like I don't think anybody who starts a battle can't walk away without scars. Like you have to have some scars, and I think to keep him a hero, he has to go through this piece of narrative where he's getting beat up by the giant.
Yeah. So like I agree karmically, and then also narratively.
Yeah.
Like this is the low point.
Yeah.
Like we have to have because he's been unscathed.
He's been riding high.
Yeah. And we need to get like, oh shit, this is really really bad.
Yeah.
And he's genuinely helpless. I mean, it's interesting to me that they don't tie him up. They keep saying, oh, we don't need to tie him up. He's so beat up. I'm like, look, that guy wiped out 6 people with a sword. I'd tie him up. Like, come on, let's be real careful with this particular person.
Exactly.
And then we see like the power of the giant.
Yeah.
And because actually Toshiro Mifune's not a big guy.
No.
I mean, they film him big.
Right.
But this giant is a big guy. Yeah. And he throws him around and bangs him into stuff and knocks him up. And each time we come back, Mifune is more bruised, more injured, and weaker.
I love his brother's like, hey, when he hits him, he said, your tap from you is like a beating from a regular man. Stop doing that. Yeah. It's such a great exchange between them.
And he keeps trying to move and he barely can move.
Yeah.
Barely can't get up on his feet. He's dragging himself with his arms. Then there's this moment, it's fairly long shot, where he's looking at something, there's a light on his face, and the light gets brighter and brighter and brighter. And we realize he's seen this open lock on this cabinet, on this chest. And he crawls into it and pulls himself inside. Now, this is not much of a plan.
No, but I think it's symbolic too, because it's like a light bulb going off in his head, because the light's going brighter and brighter. So he's coming back to kind of consciousness, so to speak. Yeah.
And they come in, they go, oh my God, he's gone. These are not the smartest of bad guys.
They're henchmen.
And they go off and search, and that gives him enough time to get out of the trunk, crawl over and climb underneath the floorboards underneath the house.
Yeah.
And by the way, his face at this moment, it looks almost kabuki-like.
Well, this is the thing and they make a reference to it later when they get to the cemetery. He is a ghost, horrors like horrors. Yeah, he looks like a horror type, what you would see in Kwaidan and these other ghost story type horror movies from Japan at that time. Very much looks like one of those. Even that guy who does the stuff in Throne of Blood, who's spinning the wheel and singing singing what's going to happen to them, like Macbeth. Like it's very much that kind of look. Yeah, the hair all disheveled and everything.
Well, and this is like the interesting thing about Kurosawa is that he embraces a lot of Western techniques and Western. He's totally open to that, but he's still very, very steeped in traditional Japanese artistry and kabuki and no drama and Japanese painting and calligraphy and all that stuff. And you see that evident in his films as well. Yeah. And that combination to me is what Kurosawa is.
Exactly, and
know
it's
what I mean?
What makes him stand out from all Japanese directors that have come before or after.
Right, and all American or European directors.
Exactly.
There's nobody quite has that thing like he does. And he crawls his way across the town square. That, by the way, is shot day for night.
Oh, okay.
And what's interesting about it, it's actually a deep focus shot with a telephoto lens, which is almost impossible because telephoto narrows focus down.
Right.
And so the only way to get deeper focus is to stop the aperture way down. So you need a ton of light, which is why it's shot day for night. Is that they have all the light in the world they can get on this thing, and then they stop the aperture, really, really small, and then that makes it day for night, and they get this sort of deep focus telephoto shot, which is pretty amazing.
Fascinating.
And he makes it to the inn just barely.
Yeah.
And the innkeeper hides him.
Yeah.
And says, "Oh, he's gone off to Seibe." And Mifune says, "Go next door and buy a coffin." And the innkeeper's like, "Oh my God, you're gonna die?" He's like, "I'm not dead yet." And then,
he says there are more people that are going to die.
Oh, is that? Yeah.
He says there are more people that are going to die before I go.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's a heroic turn moment. And then we get this kind of comedic scene where they pick up the coffin and they drag him out. And then we have Ushitora attacking Seibe.
Yeah, we see all that.
And Mifune goes, "Oh, I got to see this."
Yeah.
And so they open up the coffin just a little bit, and we see what is Ushitora's technique for attacking them. They're going to burn down the house. They're going to burn and smoke them out, which is pretty brutal.
Yeah, and set everything on fire. They're killing all his men. Yeah,
Everyone,
and then
yeah.
Sebe, the mother runs out. They kill her, which is really powerful. Even though she's a bad person, it's still unsettling to watch a woman killed like that on screen. And then they shoot his dad, the kid's dad. Then they shoot the kid. And so Sebe, after giving power completely back to this guy, dies anyway.
Yep. They just wipe him out.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
kind of unsettling. How do you feel about it? It bothers me because it's, even though they've done bad stuff, I haven't seen Sebe do anything necessarily bad. We just hear that they've done bad stuff. But like her, okay, but I don't even think she deserves that kind of death. So it's an uncomfortable situation.
I think it's the way they killed.
Yeah.
They're slaughtered.
Yeah, they're slaughtered.
And it's not fun to watch. Well, and this goes to like what we are comfortable with in a movie. And there's certain ways, like those 6 guys that got killed guarding those people, we don't care about them at all.
No, we don't.
But it's really how the movie does it and how it presents what you're seeing that changes the way we feel. And it's a weird thing is that, there's there is the powerful quote from Stalin, which is, one death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic.
Yes.
And first of all, that is completely true. Is that when we hear huge numbers of deaths in Syria or, wherever, we don't really react very strongly. But if you hear a story about a kid dying, near your house, it'll mess you up for a long time.
Well, yeah.
And in film, we do this all the time because there are movies like, I watched Guardians of the Galaxy, the first one, with my son recently. I was like, man, a lot of people get killed in this movie. I mean, there's probably 1,000 people that get killed easily in that movie. Yeah. But you don't feel it because of the way that it's presented.
Right.
And so the way those 6 people die versus the way that these people die coming out of the smoke-burning building just feels different.
Right. Plus, we've had time to connect with those characters.
Yeah.
So their death resonates.
Yeah.
And you're right. And Eddie Izzard made a great joke about it when he's like, sometimes when we hear the amount of, like, Stalin killed 10 million of his own people, and we're almost like, well done, good on you,
Right.
But when we hear about the Holocaust, it's something more visceral because it's only 3,000 or 6,000 per play, but it's also, their stories there are personal. Do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and there's like weird cultural and historical things where there are, if you look at all the big generals in history, all of them killed a whole bunch of people.
Yes.
And a lot of them did it to conquer.
Yep.
Whether it's Julius Caesar or Napoleon or Hitler or Alexander. And yet some of them, like Alexander, we kind of romanticize as a positive figure.
True.
And some of them, like Hitler, obviously, we go like, well, this is a negative figure.
Right.
Napoleon tends to be negative, but not as negative. And yet they all killed tons and tons of people. And so a lot of it is, well, how do we frame what's happening?
Yeah.
And that shows a lot of stuff about us, about humans, and why we are not trustworthy.
Yeah.
Our opinions about things, they can be pretty messed up.
They're skewed, yeah.
They're skewed.
Anyway, so.
But we digress.
So they kill off everybody.
Yep. Sebe's people are wiped out.
Yeah.
And Mifune's like, all right, get me out of here. There's only one problem.
Coffin maker ran off.
He left, man.
Yeah.
Those coffin makers, you can't trust them.
You cannot trust coffin makers.
You can only carry this, but we need 2 people to carry him.
Yeah.
Here comes Eno.
I love Eno.
Oi,
He's so, like I said, he's just so much fun. And he uses the exact same tactics that Sanjuro used. He's questioning his manhood or his strength.
Oh, you're probably scared of those ghosts down in the cemetery. Good job on the innkeeper. That's a nice Jedi mind trick for the innkeeper.
That's right, yeah.
And Eno goes, I'm not scared. Right. And of course, as soon as we get towards the cemetery, we see he is a little bit a little bit scared.
Just the way he's yelling, you're trying to scare anything around him, and then
he runs off.
He runs off because he essentially wants to help him bury Mifune, but then the innkeeper one more time tricks him and says, oh, weren't you looking for somebody? Weren't you supposed to be looking for somebody? Oh, that's right. He runs off. Yeah.
Runs off. Mifune stands up.
Yeah.
Looking literally like death at
this
this point. And then he falls down.
Right.
Yeah.
He looks like a ghost himself.
He looks like a ghost.
When he steps out of it. Yeah,
absolutely. And falls down. And then we cut to some time has passed.
Yeah.
And he's throwing a knife at a leaf. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing sort of he's gathered his strength back. And by the way, throwing the knife at the leaf, that's shot in reverse. That's how you do that trick. Okay. Is that you get a knife on a string and you put it and you blow some wind and you put it stuck into the ground on the leaf and then you just pull it out and the leaf will blow because of the wind and you reverse the film and it looks like you threw a knife at the leaf.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I love practical effects. I love how they figured out how to do stuff. So we see he's a little bit better. He can throw this knife, and who shows up? But the coffin maker.
The coffin maker shows up, right, to tell him that the innkeeper's been taken hostage because they caught him. walking with oil and whatever it is that he was carrying, and they knew he was going there to help Sanjuro. So the innkeeper tells him he's got a knife, and he says, "Well, is that enough?" And he says, "Well, I've got a sword." The coffin maker tells him, "I have a sword because being, taking care of dead people has its advantages." So he has a sword walk. So they know he's coming, right? Because they hang the innkeeper in the middle of the town. Terribly, by the way.
Yeah, it's really scary.
Yeah.
Well, and one thing too is that traditionally the sword is the soul of the samurai.
Yes.
And so reuniting Mifune Sanjuro with a sword is really symbolic.
Yeah.
And this is the hero moment. Going back.
Like you said, going back. Have to go back.
Well, it's also just like we talked about it in Pulp Fiction.
Yeah.
When Bruce Willis goes back.
He doesn't have to go back, but he goes back. With a samurai sword.
Yeah.
Yep.
So now we have, and I think that is from Yojimbo.
Absolutely.
So Mifune goes back. He's got this sword.
But this is a trope in westerns,
Yeah,
where
absolutely.
the hero gets beat up and has to go and hide out somewhere to recover, and then comes back. We see it in Unforgiven.
Yep.
And we see it here as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's it's that moment we talked about when we talked about Magnificent Seven. It's like going back when there's really no hope.
Yeah.
And no reason. Because part of the problem was he said, two bosses is worse than one.
Right. Now there's one.
There's one.
Yeah.
And is he a bad guy? Yes. But did he beat you up? Yes. But they were totally justified in beating him up.
Yes.
He killed he's killed 9 of their men.
He tricked them, yeah.
Yeah, and tricked them. So yes, they were, it's like, but he's going to go back. And we have our final showdown. Again, you can feel the Western in this.
Yeah.
And man, so we talked about Kurosawa and Love and Rain. Kurosawa loves wind.
Yeah.
There's like big jet engines blowing, not jet engines, but big airplane engines blowing this wind around. There is some serious dust blowing through this scene. And now we're finally using wide lenses, which mostly we've been using these telephoto lenses. Sorry, we see the innkeepers here to watch it, and we got Mifune with a sword facing 10 men, one of whom has a gun.
Yep.
This does not seem like good odds. And by the way, part of what they have the innkeeper tied up, hanging from a thing.
Right.
And when this showdown is going to happen, who runs in? The coffin maker runs in to cut the innkeeper down.
Right.
So he bugged out on Mifune in the coffin, but he kind of makes up for it a little bit.
Well, just like the innkeeper made up for messing up the paper on the table by tricking Ino to help him carry Mifune out there. But yeah, it's the coffin maker who comes and tells him that they've captured the innkeeper, and so they know Mifune's coming.
Now I'll skip ahead.
Okay.
And now we're in this final moment.
Yeah.
And this, to me, this is the archetype Mifune samurai movie, facing down the 10 guys in the middle of the street, the wind blowing.
Yeah.
This is the iconic moment in film that even if you haven't seen this movie, this is in your consciousness. Because so many films and so many movies have been influenced by this. This is such a big moment.
Yeah. And there's such a confidence that he's walking into the situation. And was it Uno? Is that his character, the guy with the gun? Yeah, Uno is like so confident that he can handle the situation because he has the gun, right? And no one has everyone's been afraid of him with the gun. So the way that Mifune handles it, Sanjuro handles it, he walks and then he walks so confidently because everyone else is backed down as soon as he pulls the gun out. So he's almost putting him on edge by not backing down. And then the quick movement through the knife. Hits his arm, so he shoots. He misses with the stand. He slices him up, slices everyone, and it's so fast.
10 guys in 10 seconds.
Oh, it's so fast. Man.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
So great.
And it's interesting too because where fight scenes are gonna go is into slow motion and into so you can really, and that's not what this movie does. This movie is like, this is over instantly.
Yeah.
10 guys in 10 seconds. And I think that moment of facing down Uno and the gun, that's like a death wish moment. That is like, I am in the moment of my death.
Yes.
I'm gonna die or not die. And then even after that, Uno still is trying to play this game like he's gonna. And this is, again, even more death wishy. He says, if only I could hold my gun again. Don't worry, it only had 2 bullets.
Yeah.
Which, of course, we all know that gun doesn't. There's no gun that has 2 bullets that looks like that. This is a revolver.
Right.
And I think that Sanjuro knows that the gun has more bullets, but he gives him the gun. That, to me, is a moment of, I'll die or I won't die.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
And I'm going to just sit here and see what happens.
Right. Which is, of course, the undercurrent of the whole, to me, his character. He's
That's
a
what I
gambler.
was just going to say.
He's a gambler. Yeah.
Well, and his whole motivation of going to this town is, I'm going to die or I'm not going to die.
Yes.
You know, let's see what happens. You know, that his life on some level isn't as important to him as experiencing whatever he's going to experience.
Yeah.
And Uno doesn't have it in him to kill him. The gun falls down.
It shoots, though. He says everything's going dark. He doesn't have the strength to shoot him. He still shoots the gun. So there was a bullet in that chamber.
Definitely was a bullet there.
It could have killed him.
Yeah.
So when he picks up the gun, he tries to shoot him. And this is a great moment what you just said, Steve. You're right. It's like, I'm going to die or not going to die. It's him putting it on the table. But I think this also speaks to the kind of person he is, Sanjuro. Sanjuro trusts in himself, but he's also like, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. You know, and there's not a huge weight to everything that he does. And so we see, and then we hear the guy come out banging the drums, who we had talked about at the beginning, that he bangs the drum trying to restore the town or restore his power in the town as the mayor.
It's a pretty crazed moment.
Yeah, it is. He's nuts. But then Nakadai's not dead still.
Yeah.
And says like, oh, I'll see you at the gates of hell and blah, blah, blah. And so there's still more which I think Kurosawa is, and maybe in the back of his mind, thinking that this guy is going to take over at some point, you know? And so it is 5 years later before they stop working together, him and Mifune, but I think he sees
He sees something in this guy.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah.
Why he gives him such an extended death scene. And then eventually he doesn't say goodbye to the innkeeper. He has this little moment.
Well, the guy who's banging the drum goes off and
kills the other mayor.
Kills the rival merchant.
Right. The rival merchant. You're right. Yeah.
And then Sanjuro walks off into the distance with the music. And this goes to the question that you asked earlier: is what just happened to the town?
Yeah.
Did Sanjuro save the town, or did he kill the town?
Right.
And since one mayor just killed the other, or one merchant just killed the other, and that guy seems fairly crazy.
Yeah.
And we have the only other two people, there were some prostitutes, and a lot of them maybe got killed when they burnt down Seibe's place. Maybe. And we have an innkeeper and a coffin maker who are two kind of old guys. The couple with the kid, they left. They're gone.
Right.
There's one person that Sanjuro does not kill.
Yes.
And that is the farmer's kid we met at the beginning of the movie.
I love how that wraps it up.
He lets him live, and that guy runs off back to the farm.
Yeah.
Who's left in the town?
Probably just the innkeeper.
I mean, so it seems like he just killed the town.
Maybe, but the innkeeper is going to have a lot of money. Because there's those,
sure.
Both those gangs have a lot of money in their stores somewhere, you know.
Oh, yeah.
So there's
everybody. We know there's been 50 Ryu all here all the time.
Right.
Yeah. And off goes Sanjuro.
Yeah.
And he's gone.
And I haven't seen Sanjuro in a long time. The sequel.
Me either.
So I don't know if they reference what happens to the town in some throwaway line or something. So you're right. I don't know. You're right. It's a good question. Does the town survive? Did he do the right thing? Because if all these gang guys are dead, who's going to take over the town? Yeah, the merchant is there, but who's going to become mayor? Who's left? Because we didn't see a lot of the other citizens of the town. You're right.
Well, and it's, the morality of Yojimbo is pretty black and white.
Yes.
It's you're one of the bad guys, you deserve to die.
Yes.
That's it. It's not like...
And it's spoken 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, it's like, you just deserve to die. I'm going to wipe you all out.
Yeah.
And it's not like, oh, you're kind of not a nicer person and you're more responsible or less responsible. No. You deserve to die.
So what do you think about that moment when he sends the son back? Is that Kurosawa saying something about agriculture versus chasing fame, chasing status, or
I think so.
Riches?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, Kurosawa has a pretty, I would say, conservative moral structure.
Yes.
Like his kind of sense of what is right and wrong is pretty traditional.
Yeah.
And resistant to some kinds of change.
Yeah.
He also is, big advocate of freedom of speech and freedom of the artist and a lot of other stuff. But definitely and he's interested in sort of those kind of basic fundamental moral questions.
Yep.
So John, final thoughts on Yojimbo?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite Kurosawa films, probably second to Seven Samurai, because of how it broke like I said at the beginning, how it broke the samurai convention of samurai film, the convention of samurai films, but also because it's Mifune's really, it's really a star turn, like really where he
Absolutely.
embraces becoming a star. And Kurosawa tailors the movie to all his talents, and it works so well. And he fleshes it out with these incredibly interesting, fun characters. Some are stock, and some are more fleshed out, more complex characters. Because we see this becoming a thing in the '60s and '70s with the characters. They're not just stock anymore. There's more going on here, and so it speaks to so much of what's happening, not only agriculturally and technology-wise and government-wise at that time. It also speaks to what's happening currently in the 60s, but it could still echo into now in the 2017s. You know, we have stuff that's going on here too that is happening with our changes in our culture and our society. So it echoes through. But if you strip all of that away, it's just a fantastically fun film with a great lead and an awesome Western in samurai garb. Yeah, that's what I would say.
It's a Western Eastern.
Yeah, Western Eastern.
As they said, as Bruce Lee said about Kung Fu, about the TV show, what do you want it to be? It's a Western, but an Eastern.
Yes.
One thing that occurred to me as you were saying that, because we talked about the split of Mifune and Kurosawa, is that, and this is the movie where Mifune goes from being an actor to an icon.
Yes.
And maybe that's part of the split, you know, is that, you know, he can't be a collaborator. He can't be a, you know, an underling to Kurosawa anymore, because now his stature has become star. It's become icon. And maybe that's why the collaboration had to end.
Yeah.
You know?
And you have to watch that documentary because Mifune becomes he's a very big drinker. And he's very angry. He's very angry when he drinks. So there may have been some incredibly terrible fights between them. Yeah.
Kurosawa, one of the things that's striking in his autobiography, by the way, is how much time is spent talking about alcohol. I mean, it is like, you know, like he was out of money because he spent it all on alcohol. Wow. Like that happens over and over again. Holy crap. And then we went and, I mean, there's just so many of the stories center around, and then we went and drank, and we drank all night. I mean, he was a serious drinker. So it's funny. So my final thoughts, when I watched it a few days ago, I remember I called you and told you, man, this movie's not deep.
Yeah.
You know, it's fun, but not deep. And then as I've been thinking about it, it's not that it's heavy or complex or intellectual in any way. But I'm starting to think that I was wrong in that first assessment. Is that, and it's kind of deep the way a haiku can be deep. You know, like a haiku or Japanese calligraphy or some kinds of Japanese art appear very simple on the surface. And you go, I can't come up with a brilliant haiku on the spur of the moment, but you'll hear something about a waterfall, or about, you know, the rain, or about a boat going down the river. And you'll go, oh, that's pleasant when you read the haiku. And then as you ponder it and you spend sort of more time, its simplicity allows your brain to sort of float on a certain level. And I feel like that's kind of, Yojimbo is very simple, and it doesn't directly introduce a lot of complicated ideas. And yet there's something in the poetry of it that maybe is kind of deep and is something to contemplate, and not come up with an answer in the way that you don't come up with an answer to a classic Zen question. Right. You know, that it is the contemplation of the unknowable. And Sanjuro's character is definitely unknowable, that leads you somewhere. Yeah. But where it leads you, I couldn't really tell you.
Yeah, and I love that it creates an iconic character that we'll see again with Clint Eastwood, and we'll see again as currently as John Wick. Yeah. We don't have the background. We don't know where this guy came from. Only through exposition and other people's conversations do we get to know this person. Yep. And then this person just wreaks havoc on the bad people and walks away. Yeah. It's great.
Yeah. Wonder if we'll ever do the John Wick Cine-Files.
We're 10 years out.
Yeah, we got a little ways. So that's what we think about Yojimbo. Of course, as always, we want to hear what you think about Yojimbo. You can visit us on Facebook at the Cine-Files. You can subscribe to us on iTunes. And while you're there on iTunes, please leave us a review. You can subscribe on Stitcher. You can subscribe on YouTube. And of course, we read all your comments on YouTube. We don't always have time to respond to all of them, but we definitely read them. We really, really appreciate them. Yeah. And you can join us by supporting us on Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/the Cine-Files, there are all sorts of different levels where we have great great rewards for all of you, and we love your support. It helps us to keep the show going. And as always, you can reach me on Twitter at SR Morris. John, where can they reach you?
You can always reach me at The Rocha Says, ROCHA. And of course, my other podcast, the Outlaw Nation podcast. It's on the SK Plus podcast channel. And then on Movie Talk every Friday at 10 a.m. You can see me there as well. And of course, and thanks so much to everyone who's left comments already and ratings, and also everyone who's donated so far with Patreon. It's been really surprising and humbling for both of us to, I think I can speak for Steve say that, humbling for both of us, see how many people really love the show and want to support the show and keep it going. And tell your friends, tell your family, tell as many people as possible, because we got on that list of up and coming film.
Yeah, that was a really cool one.
Right? So we definitely think we've got a great show here that should find a wider audience. So help us do that in any way that you can.
Yeah. Go door to door if you have to.
If you have to, yes.
Yeah. But don't get one side against each other or anything like that. Like, don't start a war in a village over the Cine-Files. It's not worth it, friends.
It really is.
All right. So that's it for this week. We'll see you next time on the Cine-Files.